All right, one thing I wanted to announce is that starting on this episode, we'll be incorporating a video podcast. So if you have a streaming service that allows for watching the video along with the audio, the MI Honey podcast will now feature video to go along with the audio. So it's an upgrade to be able to highlight individuals that are being interviewed. Now you'll be able to put a face to the name, as well as incorporating additional visual effects and guides or examples for viewing as well. You'll have that available. Or if you're wanting to watch the videos as well, head on over to YouTube or Rumble and you can watch the full length podcast with the additional video for your viewing pleasure. So let's get back into the episode, and thank you. Welcome to the MI Honey podcast. On this episode, we're doing a fall food plot plant breakdown. All right, welcome to the MI Honey podcast. Thank you for listening. So this episode is a follow-up to the interview I did with Albert with Vitalize Seed. Basically did a breakdown of his seed mixes and why he picked what he did and what it does for soil health. Now, the one thing we really didn't dive too much into is why he picked those plants for fall food plots and why deer, would be attracted to them. So that's what we're going to do on this episode. I'm going to do a breakdown of different plant species that you would typically find in especially a fall food plot seed mix. So I'm not going to do a complete deep dive on what Albert's seed blend is, but I'm going to highlight a lot of the, basically your typical fall food plot seeds and what they do for the deer, and then also basically kind of why you'd want to pick certain ones to plant for your food plot as well. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and jump over to the conservation news. Says there is a pretty big news piece that's coming out of California. So let's take a look at that. All right, so what we've got here is this is from the Sportsman Alliance. Now, there's a lot of different news groups that are reporting on this. Basically, the state of California is being sued by different outdoor groups. So basically, it's the Sportsman Alliance, the Safari Club International, SoCal, Top Guns, and the Congressional Sportsman Foundation. Basically stating that this new law from California that's basically a marketing ban on firearms or anything related to firearms, really. It's basically blocking any type of marketing towards minors, so anyone less than or under 18. So basically what these groups are saying is that this new law is in violation of the First, Second, Fifth, and 14th Amendment. So basically what they're saying in this article is that this new law essentially would eliminate any type of promotional stuff for youth hunting, youth shooting clubs, anything. You cannot promote hunting to anyone under 18 whatsoever. And it doesn't matter if you're in the gun manufacturing or ammo manufacturing, or if you're an organization or a private member. Basically it's an all-out ban that if you promote anything gun related to anyone under 18, then you are in violation of this. Now, when you first read through it, you're thinking, is it really that bad? Do they really get into it? Well, one of their arguments is that the language that the law uses doesn't really narrow down on who could be in violation. And in fact, I actually think it goes the opposite. It specifically points out who is in violation, and it's basically anyone. So again, just like anything else, you got to find out, is it really what they're saying in this article? So what we're actually going to do is jump right to the actual bill. So this is from the California Legislative Information. So this is actually the bill that they're talking about. So it's not a long bill, so it's easily able to read through it. But one of the things I'm going to first go to is down here. So the marketing of firearms to minors. So what it states here is that a firearm industry member shall not advertise, market, or arrange for placement of an advertising or marketing communication concerning any firearm-related product in a manner that is designed, intended, or reasonably appears to be attractive to minors. So if you read through that, you're thinking, okay, gun manufacturers and ammunition companies aren't allowed to, promote their products in things that would attract youth. Doesn't seem too bad, from that initial reading. Now, in determining whether marketing or advertising of firearm-related products is attractive to minors is described in paragraph 1 here. The court shall consider the totality of the circumstances, including but not limited to whether the marketing or advertising. So basically, it goes down to a breakdown of this, if it uses any characters. So if you have any type of cartoony or anything, of that nature, you can't promote any type of clothing. So no, shirts, hats, anything regarded to firearms being promoted to kids. So they actually have not limited to hats, t-shirts, clothing, toys, games, stuffed animals that promotes firearm industry member or firearm related products. So you can't have a toy, you can't have a stuffed animal, you can't have clothing, anything with a gun. That's a no-go. So the one thing that I caught initially is the firearm industry member. So what are they talking about when it talks about a firearm industry member? Who are they talking about? So you have to go down a little bit further, down here to number 4. So firearm industry member means any of the following. So it's a person, firm, corporation, company, partnership, society, joint stock company, or any other entity or association engaged in the manufacture, distribution, importation, marketing, wholesale, or retail sale of firearm related products. It also goes on to person, firm, corporation, company, partnership, society, joint company, or any entity or association formed for the express purpose of promoting, encouraging, or advocating for the purchase, use, or ownership of firearm-related products that does one of the following. So they just broke down what they mean by firearm industry person. Ultimately, it can be anybody. That first one, a person. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be essentially joined to any one of those larger organizations or groups or anything like that. If you're an individual and you do any of this, you could be in violation. So what are the things that you have to do to be in violation? So you have to advertise firearm related products, advertise events where firearm related products are sold or used, endorsing specific firearm related products, sponsors or otherwise promotes events which firearm products are used and sold. It also breaks down, so you can't do any marketing or advertising. So basically you can't do any paid advertising. So with all this, it's basically a complete shutdown of any type of promotional thing for anything in the hunting industry. Now, so their biggest argument in this lawsuit is it has really cuts down on the ability to promote youth using firearms. So that would be any type of hunting youth related event, or even potentially like hunter safety. You would get rid of any type of youth shooter leagues. There's 4-H groups that do shooting as well, and tons of other organizations that promote shooting events for minors. Essentially, I'm not going to read through the whole law. You can read through it more if you like, but essentially from how I read it, they are doing a complete shutdown of any type of promotional youth or anything for anyone under the age of 18 to be able to do anything firearm related. They want a complete shutdown of anyone that's not 18 years or older to do anything with firearms. And again, part of the language is that they do leave it kind of open to interpretation. So there's a lot of gray area on whether or not certain events or individuals would fall under these categories and ultimately commit a violation. So the lawsuit is going to be pending. So we'll have to see what ends up happening. It's going to be hard for them to really make ground in California, but this would be a significant precedent being made that could, dictate on what other states do as well. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with this. Ultimately, in the writing, it kind of comes up as a bad law. In most areas, this wouldn't hold up in court. They've made too many, sweeping statements with it, and it covers too broad of an area. Now in California, who knows what's going to happen with it? All right. So now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the subject at hand of talking about different plant types that you can put in for your fall food plot. All right, so this is going to be our fall food plot breakdown. So we're basically going to cover the common fall food plot seeds for deer. That's really going to break down into 3 categories. We got cereal grains, clovers, and brassicas. Those are the big ones that people use during the fall. Now, of course, you've got corn and soybean, but that has been planted spring or summer food plot that you've planted, or if you're hunting over ag fields. Well, that's going to be a little bit different. This is going to be for if you're planting a fall specific food plot. So what we're going to do is going to break down each individual class, what the different species are commonly used, what benefit they have for deer, and then we kind of follow up towards the end of how to key on that or utilize these different plants for hunting. So we're going to get into the cereal grains first. So again, there's lots of grains that you can look at, but the big ones that most people work with are either rye, wheat, or oats. So we're going to focus on rye. That's one of the easiest ones to grow. It's a cold tolerant, so if it's established, even during the winter months, up here in the north where we get plenty of snow cover, deer will actually dig at that snow, get down to that rye. It does very well in poor quality acidic soil, so if your soil quality is not up to snuff, you can plant rye. I basically always use rye as kind of my fail-safe. If I had a food plot that failed for whatever reason, if we didn't get the rain, if I had bad germination, if I have bare spots, if it gets overbrowsed, rye is a great go-to to be able to salvage a food plot. Basically it works as a pretty significant filler because it grows so well. Now it does have a pro and a con to it depending on how you want to look at it. So it does have allopathic chemicals. Basically what that does is it suppresses the germination of plants around it. Now, that would be important if you're especially doing a blend into a standing patch of rye, or if you had a very significant amount of rye in whatever, if you're doing like a blend or something like that. The higher concentration of that rye, the more that chemical is going to be working in the soil and kind of suppressing the plants around it. So that does work well as a weed suppressant. So if you do have significant weeds, or if you know that you're going to have the potential for significant weeds, then rye is a very good plant to put in there as a weed suppressant. But if you're mixing it in with other blends, where some of your other plant species may have a harder time germinating if that rye is already established. Now, the other thing for deer, its protein level is at 12 to 16%. So it's not that high in the protein category compared to other forages, and is not one of the most desirable, especially in regards to the cereal grains. Uh, deer will eat it, they will seek it out. It does do well late season, so it does stay green throughout the winter months. So it can be there, late season or for the long term of the season, if some of the other plant species have either been already eaten or died out from the winter. Next, we have wheat. Wheat's another good one. It's another relatively cheap grain to get. It does still grow quite easily. It is still cold hardy, so if you're planting here in the fall, then you're going to have it go through well into the late fall, early winter, and still be viable, and deer will still seek it out. It is drought tolerant, so if you do plant it a little bit earlier, and then we start getting some warm days or warm weeks and we're not getting much rain, it's still going to stay there. It'll just kind of go in a dormant phase. As soon as it starts getting rain in, it's going to pop back up just like grass does. It is very highly palatable, so deer will seek it out even more so than what they will for rye. And then for protein content, it can get a little bit better. Now, on the low end, it does have the 12%, but it can get up to 24%. Now, a lot of that does depend on your soil quality and type of amendments you might have put on the soil. So there is quite a bit of variation with that. But again, a little bit better in regards to the deer seeking it out than rye, but may not grow quite as well. All right, and the last one we're going to highlight is oats. Oats are the highest desired of the cereal grains. They have the highest palatability, so deer can easily digest it. It is still relatively easily grown, but the downfall with it is that once those cold late fall and early winter months hit, those frosts and those freezes will kill it out. So that's definitely one that's more so for earlier season. So that's one thing that you can key on, is that it will be much more desirable in the early weeks of hunting, but then as the season progresses, especially as you get into late season, then it's not going to be there, or deer may not seek it out. Now it is a little bit more particular. The likes of pH of 6, and the protein level is a little bit higher than the other two, from 15 to 25%. All right, so now let's jump into the other big ones, is clovers. Clovers are really good to plant in the fall because they are a cool season legume, so they prefer the cooler, wetter months of spring and fall. So again, there's lots of different variations of clover, different hybrids, subspecies. So these are just going to be some of the more common or ones that you may want to consider when adding a clover to any of your food plot program. So the first one is crimson clover. Now this one's starting to become one of my favorites because of its basic versatility, and me doing basically 2 plantings a year. I'm not looking to establish a standing clover plot that's going to last for years. I just want some clover to hurry up, grow up, get the benefits of it, and then I terminate it and change it up again. So this is a short-lived, cool season annual. It performs well in a wide range of soils, ranging from heavy clay to sandy soil. So depending on what your region is, what your soils look like, it's going to do relatively well, regardless of what your soils look like. It does have a crude protein level of 25 to 30%. Now this is where a lot of the clovers really shine. They have a pretty significant protein content. And this is one of the most digestible of forages for deer. So it's one thing that if you get that protein at 25 to 30%, and because it's so digestible, the deer are actually getting the bulk of those nutrients from that clover and being able to utilize it. Now this is one of the highest producing of the clovers. So if we're looking at total biomass, it can produce 6 to 7,000 pounds per acre, and that's of dry weight. So if you take all the plants out, dry them out, how much weight per acre would you have? So that's pretty significant considering that it's an annual clover. Now the next one is red clover. So this is another, again, cool season, and it's classified as a biennial with 2-year lifespan. So basically what that means is that the first year when you plant it, it's going to grow up, it's going to leaf out. It's not designed to flower and create a seed right away. It's going to grow up, establish itself that first year, and then the second year start to flower, seed out, and go from there. So it's again a widely adaptable in different soils and climate conditions. So this is a good one for depending on where you're at in the country. Even if you're in the north, it can do relatively well, but then also if you're further south, it can do well as there too. So it does have some versatility of where you're at within the country of being able to utilize this one or not. Again, another one, very good crude protein, 20 to 30%. Now the other good benefit with this one too, it is resistant to grazing pressure. So if you're in an area that has a lot of deer or a lot of grazing being done, or if you're planting on a smaller plot, this one may be a good one for you as well to add in because it can handle that grazing pressure. Then we've got Frosty Berseem Clover. Hope I'm saying that right still. So this is another, again, cool season annual legume. Now, unlike the Berseem Clover that has been widely used, this is a newer version, or new variation, I guess I should say, that is much more cold tolerant than the previous version. So this type of clover, the standard Berseem clover, did not do well after frost or freezing. Once the first hard frost hits or freezing, then the plant's pretty much done. This one, on the other hand, is much more tolerant to the cold and will stay vibrant throughout the freezing. It can actually stay, or continue to stay, vibrant even into single-digit temperatures. Now, it is a little bit more specific on what type of soils it does do well in. It does like a soil pH of 6 or higher, and it grows well in all soil types except for if you have a very, very deep sandy soil that doesn't hold moisture very well. The other good thing is it does germinate quicker than some of the other clovers, so it can be one of the first ones that gets established, nutrient going or start taking browse pressure much sooner than some of the other clovers might. Again, with it being a clover, protein levels somewhere between 20 to 30%. All right, this next one is the Latino Clover. Again, this is another big one that a lot of people know about, all the different variations. Again, another cool season. This is the perennial version. This is the one you'll typically see if someone has a standing clover field that they've established and are running it for year after year. High quality and high animal palatability. So again, lots of nutrients in it, easy to digest for wildlife and deer. Again, the big benefit with this one is that it has a long stand life because it's a perennial. It'll come back year after year after year as long as you maintain it. And it's very tolerant to a wide range of soil and climate conditions. So it's very versatile, again, depending on your soil type and condition, as well as where you're at within the country. Now this one, again, a little bit better. Protein content between 25 to 30%. All right, now we're moving on to brassicas. Now these are some of my favorite, especially when it comes to the fall food plots. This is what is going to get a lot of attraction, at least in my opinion, and you're going to get the most biomass and just most food available for deer. Now brassicas fall under the class, same family class as all sorts of lettuces, your broccolis, your cauliflowers, those types of things, those big leafy plants that you could even plant in a garden. And there's lots of different variations, again, of different brassicas that you could plant into a food plot. Again, I'm going to highlight just really the big ones that most people use, and you can kind of look at subgroups and hybrids if you want for your own plot. So one of the most common and most popular one is rapeseed. And again, cool season annual. So again, you're going to want to plant this late summer, early fall. It prefers well-drained, loamy soils, but can grow virtually anywhere. So that's why it's a big one. Depending on what your soil quality is, it's still going to do well. It's very cold tolerant. So it's going to last well into after frost and after the snow falls. And it contains greater than 30% of protein and approximately 15% of acid detergent fiber. So what that is a classification of basically the digestibility of the plant. So the lower the percentage, the more nutrients the animal can get out of it. So at 15%, which means it's very highly digestible and deer can utilize a lot of the nutrients efficiently. All right, next we have kale. Kale's another big one because it produces a ton of leafy green. And that's the primary goal of the kale, is that it grows a high amount of leafy forage. It produces more of the green forage than any of the other brassicas. So if you want those big, lush green leaves for those deer to eat on, kale is what you want to go with. Now, the downfall with kale is that it doesn't create any type of bulb as well. So it's all up top for all that forage. And it has really good winter hardiness and a very high leaf to stem ratio. We're looking at lots of biomass. So kale can produce 3 to 4 tons per acre of dry weight of just that top growth. So all that leafy green, 3 to 4 tons. And it provides up to 25% protein. So it's not as nutrient packed as, let's say, like the rape earlier, but it's going to give you just a ton of green leafy stuff for those deer to eat. Now the next one is turnips. Now this is one of my favorites, probably because of the fact that you got the best of both worlds. So it produces a leafy green forage as well as a bulb. Now the forage contains about 25% crude protein. So again, not quite as good as the rape, but then also that bulb can also contain 12 to 15%. Now this one puts out the most amount of yield, or basically just tonnage of food available. It can yield more than 8 tons of forage per acre. And that's because you've got both the leafy greens on top and that bulb that can get digged out. The other great thing with it, they stay digestible for deer throughout the growing season. So even after we start getting some early frost or hard frost or even snow cover, it's going to stay very, very desirable for deer. Now the downfall with it is that it is a little bit more picky when it comes to the soils as well as how good your soil is. So it does do well on a wide range of soils, but it has to be well drained. You want really fertile soils with a pH that's 6.5 to essentially 7. So your pH has to be on point and your nutrients have to be on point as well. If you've ever planted turnips before, or even brassicas, you may notice after a few weeks of growth that they're starting to turn color. It's because that higher nutrient demand these plants have, that if you're lacking anything in your soils, you're going to start seeing the effects of it after just a few weeks of growth. Now you can supplement that with a little bit of fertilization to kind of boost that back up again and get you through the season, but it will point out your weak spots in your soil. Now the next one is radishes. Now this one, again, a lot of people are kind of mixed about it on whether or not it's very desirable for deer. Some people have noticed that deer absolutely pound it, love it. Other people notice that they don't really pay too much attention to the radishes and focus on some of the other brassicas or other parts of their food plot. So radishes are a cool season biennial forage again. So it really is designed to be a 2-year plant. It produces a long taproot. And that's why it's so widely used, especially in agriculture as well as in the food plot world, to be able to help promote good soils. Basically, that deep taproot drives down into the soil, pulling nutrients from deep down where some of the other plants can't reach it. And then once that plant dies, you got that big old root in there that's going to die, start to decompose. It's going to break up that soil by drilling down into it. So if you have compacted soils, it'll dig down there, drill it up. You'll usually hear the term tillage radish, and that's exactly why. It drills down there, gets down that soil, breaks it up, and then as it dies and decomposes, you've got just a pocket of nutrients in that soil. It's going to break down, add to organic matter, and add nutrition or nutrients that are trapped in that big tuber that's drilled down there, and then will be released as it decomposes. So you basically have a pocket of slow release fertilizer down in your soil. So one thing with this one, it is again a little bit pickier about where you plant it. So it does not perform well in wet soil. So if you're down in the marsh or something like that, or where an area that gets potentially flooded in the fall, not necessarily your best bet to go with that one. It is less cold tolerant than some of the other brassicas as well. So this one is going to be more attractive before really some hard frost, and some of the other brassicas are going to really hit their stride after a few frosts. And again, this one can produce a significant amount of tonnage. So easily grows 2 to 3 tons per acre of dry weight of forage, and another ton per acre with that root growth. The forage itself contains 30% crude protein, and the root can do greater than 20% as well. Again, this is also a very highly digestible plant. Again, you're looking at really a higher draw before any of the hard frosts in comparison to some of the other brassicas. So let's wrap this one up. So in closing, the one thing that I saw has been on a lot of forums and discussion lately is whether or not doing a not so much monoculture, but doing these higher diversity blends that a lot of people are probably hearing about, where you're mixing your cereal grains, clovers, brassicas, just kind of that the term gets thrown around, the kitchen sink blends. So there is some research in it where there's people that are saying that you should not, or you'll have a food plot failure if you do these significant mixes. That's not necessarily true. So there is some research that kind of backs up both sides of the argument. So we're looking at whether if it's monoculture or one of these diversity blends. So generally a monoculture, or if you kind of keep similar plant families together. So monoculture could even be simply as if you have a stand of just simply brassicas. Now, yes, you have different varieties of brassicas mixed in that blend, but they're all in the same family or plant family group. So that's, yes, it's a diverse blend in regards to the individual plants, but plant species wise, you're still dealing with the same family of plants. They're gonna need relatively the same nutrients and have the same, draw the same nutrients out of the soil essentially. Or you get these diversity blends where you mix in different family plant groups together. The idea with those is that they work together, share nutrients. Some are putting nutrients back into the soil while others are taking them out, and vice versa. So the big argument against these big diversity blends is that because you've got all these plants competing for nutrients, that none of them are really going to do well, or some plants may start to choke out others and dominate over the entire plot, and then some plants will suffer, and you kind of, the argument is that you wasted time and money putting all this stuff together. Now, there is research that's come out that's basically says that both sides are right. So a monoculture type field is going to have higher yields. So this is more important for, especially in the agricultural side, where they're looking at total bushels of harvest. Now, these diversity blends, is suggesting that they're far more for forage. So if you're someone that has, even again in the egg world, if you're doing pasture, diversifying your field up is going to give you more biomass. Now, in the food plot world, I think that is the bigger thing that we're really looking at. Now, if you're doing, something like stated before, if you have a corn field or if you have a soybean field and you're looking to get those ears of corn or those seed pods, then you may not necessarily want to throw a big mix together and do it that way. But if you're looking for, especially doing a more of a forage type food plot, then doing these diversity blends are going to give you more of that biomass. Now, I'm probably going to do another episode about this more depth and break down these figures that this research is suggesting. I just didn't want to take too much time on this one and really get down to the weeds on those numbers, because you are dealing with a lot of research and it's not an easy read and it's a lot to digest. So the other takeaway with these different plant groups, if you didn't catch on to it, is that the timing of attraction is different for a lot of these plants. So some of them are early season where they are, far more desirable early on. So if you're looking at like oats or the radishes that are going to be more palatable and more desirable early in the season before those frosts start to hit them and start to kill them out a little bit, you can key on that. And then you've got your clovers that kind of have a wide range, especially if you mix some of those clovers together. You can have some that are going to, do well early on. Maybe some of them may get killed out after the first hard frost or freezes. And then you have others that are going to be more sustainable as well. Same thing with the Brassicas. The bulk of those will really hit their stride after those first few freezes. And deer really seek them out at that time. So that's another good reason to kind of diversify your food plot. If you had, let's say, a standing thing of Brassicas, which I've done in the past, I'm sure many of you have as well, where you'll get your Brassicas planted. After about a month or so, they'll start looking really good. And then next thing you know, you come back like a week later and it looks like everything's been mowed down. With that, basically those plants start to hit a certain level of attraction. The deer keyed in on it and just annihilated it. And I've had it down to where basically my Brassica plots were, lip high in, first to middle of November. They basically had eaten it all down to the ground. That's again another reason why I think a good blend of all these different plant varieties is a good idea. Basically, the deer can kind of key in on different plants at different times and not be focused on your property all at once for a short period of time and move on. So what I'm talking about is, so let's say you want to be able to keep the deer on your property for the course of the entire hunting season. You'll want something that has early attraction, that's good throughout the middle of the season, and then stuff that's going to be really attractive still towards the end of the season. Now, if you're only keying in on one type of plant group, so let's say you're going with radishes and that's all you planted, they're going to be really good up until those first frosts, and then the deer aren't going to key on them anymore. So you're going to lose out on the latter part of the season of not having your food plot have its maximum attraction. Now, if you're on the other side, if you are hunting in a spot where you're only going to key in on the property for, let's say, a couple weeks, or if you're only looking at doing during rifle season, that's later part of the year, then you can probably get away with not focusing on that stuff for the early season and put all your eggs in a basket for the end of the season. Now, I would certainly still recommend that you kind of mix up some of your plant species that are going to be all kind of leaning towards the later part of the attraction season. You may want to still diversify your plants so just a little bit. They're all going to hit their peak attraction in the later in the season. But you could take that approach if that's what you're looking at. But many people are looking at trying to keep the deer on their property for the entire hunting season. So that's why a lot of times by mixing it up, by having those different plant species in there, deer can have, basically that draw throughout the course of the entire season, have a wide mix of plants to be able to pick from. So, and again, the other thing I want to talk about too is depending on the size of your food plot as well. So if you got like a quarter acre or eighth acre or a very small food plot, then you're going to want something that either has a lot of biomass to it, or that's going to be very browse tolerant as well. If you've ever planted a very small food plot and noticed that it just gets hammered, eaten down to the dirt, you need to either consider picking a plant that's going to be able to handle that browsing pressure, boost your amount of forage available, or you're going to have to upscale your food plot a little bit. So that's another thing to take into consideration when selecting what type of plant species that you want for your specific area. Ultimately, I'm sold on the fact that by diversifying your fall food plot, that you're going to get the most out of it. It's going to have the highest draw for deer throughout the course of the entire season, which in turn is going to help boost your chance for success by those deer are staying on your property, around your property much longer, give you more opportunities to be able to hunt them. So I think that's a wrap on this. Again, there's a lot more you can get into, lots of different types of plant species, different varieties, like I said, hybrids. But this is just kind of an overview of generally some things to take in consideration, or hopefully, you can take some of these plant species and just kind of, key in on these ones that are going to be kind of your more common or more popular ones to key in on, and go from there. And that way, when you're selecting your food plot blends or seed mixes, that you know a little bit more about each plant that goes into it and why you may want to key in on those species or that plant mix. So that's a wrap on this one. And again, as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.